Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, drinks fans? Welcome to episode 309 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for another interview episode where I track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that I can share their secrets with you. This time around, I'm joined by Alex Lamb and Max Well, directors of an awesome tiki documentary called The Donn of Tiki. If you've got even a passing acquaintance with the history of tropical drinks, you'll know that this refers to Donn the Beachcomber, aka Donn Beach, aka Ernest Gant, a figure who looms large in the world of tiki and exotica, and whose life and legacy are almost as intriguing and complex as the iconic drinks that he gave birth to in his decades as a restaurateur and entertainer. But before we start digging into the details of this fascinating film, which just so happens to feature some of the most important tiki researchers and best tropical drinks bartenders in the world, let's take a brief pause so that you can make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Cobra's Fang. To make it, you'll need 1.5 ounces of overproof Demerara rum. I like Lemon Heart or Hamilton 151 in this roll. 1/2 ounce aged Jamaican rum, something like Appleton Estate would work nicely here. 1/2 ounce orange juice, 1/2 ounce lime juice, 1/2 ounce falernum, 1/2 ounce fashionola syrup, which is a fruit syrup you might know from the hurricane cocktail. Look up Matt Petrick's analog fashionola for an easy at-home recipe to make. 1 to 2 dashes of Angostura bitters and 1 to 2 dashes of absinthe or Pernod. I've seen recipes with up to 6 dashes of the old absinthe in there, so if you really like that sort of licoricey anisey pop, go nuts. Combine your ingredients in a cocktail shaker with ice, shake until everything is well jumbled up and properly chilled, then strain into a tall, footed tropical drinks glass, or your favorite tiki mug, over crushed ice, garnish with a mint sprig and a lime wheel, or maybe get artsy with some snake-themed garnish art, and enjoy. The Cobra's Fang is a classic Donn Beach tiki cocktail aimed at macho men who thought they were a match for the overproof rum in this recipe. If you do your research on the spec, you'll find that there's quite a bit of variation when it comes to the precise ratios of the rums and the syrups. So I'd say this, as long as you end up with a 2-ounce blend of your Demerara overproof and Jamaican rums, and as long as you end up with about 1 ounce to 1.25 ounces of your falernum and fashionola combined, then you should be just fine. There's also plenty of speculation about Donn's connection with the history and development of fashionola based on his ties to the city where it was purportedly developed, perhaps even by Donn himself. But I think when it comes to this episode, I'm not the one with the best credentials to be talking Donn Beach lore and history. So with that, let's turn our attention back to the interview. In this fascinating conversation with Max Well and Alex Lamb, directors of The Donn of Tiki, some of the topics we discuss include how a COVID-era YouTube short on the history of tiki in LA snowballed into a full-length feature film on one of the most iconic bar entrepreneurs of the 20th century. The way that stop-motion puppetry and clever era-appropriate animations were used to give Donn an embodied presence in his own story, with audio unearthed from a single set of tapes uncovered at the University of Hawaii. The interesting ironies that run through Donn's life, including his propensity to build big and lose everything, and the very different love interests who came and went, changing his trajectory and altering the arc of tropical drinks history in the process. We also explore the two seemingly opposed natures operating at the same time in Donn Beach. His unwavering pursuit of authenticity and quality, on the one hand, which was often masked by his flair for showmanship and his trickster-like talent for tall tales and misdirection. Along the way, we revel in Donn's ability to create freak evening thunderstorms with a hose atop his LA speakeasy, speculate about how he might feel about super juice, and even take the time to appreciate his unexpected role in the revival of authentic Hawaiian culture in the 20th century. When this episode airs, Alex and Max will still be touring and doing screenings around the country, so head over to thedonnoftiki.com to check out their schedule, and be sure to keep your eyes peeled for when this film hits your favorite streaming services in the near future. But until then, I hope you enjoy this super fun conversation with the film's creators, Max Well and Alex Lamb. Alex, Max, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having us.
So I'm super excited to dig into all things Donn Beach and Tiki. But before we do that, let's get you guys to introduce yourselves to our listeners. Who are you, broad strokes? And maybe along with the intro, give us a little insight on what drew you to Donn Beach.
I'll start, I guess.
Yeah,
My name
perfect.
is Max Well. I'm one of the directors of the Donn of Tiki, along with Alex here. We initially did not set out to make a movie about Donn Beach, to be honest. We set out to make about a 10-minute YouTube short about a couple of tiki bars in LA. We were going to explore the Tiki Tea and Tonga Hut, both based in Los Angeles, which were built in 61, I think, for Tiki Tea, and 58 for Tonga Hut. I think that's when they opened. We thought, hey, this was during COVID, I should say. So we had time. That was why we started the project initially. And we thought, let's do a 10-minute piece about the history of Tiki in LA. And without, knowing much about Donn Beach at that point, we started doing some research and learning just a little bit about Donn's life. We thought, boy, if half of this stuff that people say about Donn is true, this would be a fascinating subject for a film. And so we kind of pivoted to making this a story about Donn Beach. And then we just went down a complete rabbit hole, and our 10-minute YouTube short became a feature-length doc.
Yeah, I'm Alex Lamb, the other director, and everything Max said is true.
Good that you guys have strong accord between the two of you. What is your your connection to the cocktail world besides being interested in these two bars in LA? Like, are you guys bartenders? Are you tiki enthusiasts yourselves? Like, what's your cocktail connection?
Yeah, I was kind of a tiki enthusiast. I didn't know nearly as much as I know now. But when we started this, I was kind of making drinks at home and reading Jeff Berry's books, and I was interested in it. That's really kind of what drew me to the idea of doing this was the cocktails and sort of the impact Donn had on cocktail culture. I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, and I knew very little about the cocktail world. I really am more of a beer guy, to be honest. I mean, traditionally, I've since, I dabbled in cocktails occasionally. I have a much greater respect for cocktails now after learning about Donn Beach's work.
Well, for people who aren't necessarily like heavy duty bartenders, you certainly ended up doing the rounds of some amazing tiki and tropical bartenders. I mean, you mentioned Jeff Berry. He was certainly an anchor point in this documentary. Who are some of the other folks that you got to speak with along the way?
Oh, man, so many. We talked to Marie King, who is the beverage director at the new version of Donn the Beachcomber, which exists in Florida currently. We talked with, who else? Sam Miller. Martin, Rebecca Kate. They run Smuggler's Cove up in the Bay Area, and also a few other bars. Who else?
Garrett Richard and Shannon Mustafer in New York were both great interviews in terms of like the cocktail aspect of it. That was one thing we knew is we wanted to really, Donn Beach's life is crazy. It goes into all these different facets and everything, but we knew we wanted to have a good piece of the movie focused just on the cocktails and sort of what he did historically to kind of create this type of cocktail that didn't really exist before him that we know of.
Yeah, you certainly had a lot of wonderful technical advisors. From what I recall, I think Jeff Barry also had some really good insights into the craft, specifically when he was talking about how a lot of these fruity rum drinks were originally aimed at a more female audience, and then to kind of
Right.
adjust for the fact that men were now following these women into these bars, you had to launch more dangerous sounding ones like the Zombie and the Cobra's Fang, stuff like that. So I really appreciated. Certainly the technical side, you're right. Garrett was also, and Shannon were also really strong in that. The thing that I noticed that was, I think, a really interesting, from a film standpoint, a really interesting pacing component to this documentary was the fact that you gave Donn a voice and a body in multiple different expressions. So can you talk about some of the animation, stop motion and otherwise, and some of the ways that you worked in? It seems like it all came from like one or two central interviews with Donn, but his actual voice into the film.
Yeah. Well, the interview, Don's voice is actually all from one interview that he did. What year was that, Matt? Like 85?
I think it was 86 or 87. It was a couple years before he died.
Yeah, it was an interview he did for an oral history sort of project put on by the Wadamo Foundation in Hawaii. And it was sort of, they were interviewing people that had to do with Hawaiian travel and Hawaii, like the sort of business side of Hawaii, especially in the mid-century. And they were interviewing Donn. And we had read this transcript of this interview many times when we were doing our research, not even really thinking, oh, there's audio of this out there. But at the bottom of the transcript, it did say, tape 1, side B or something. We were like, man, there must be a tape somewhere. And a lot of the sort of tiki people we were talking to were like, yeah, you're not going to find that tape. Nobody's ever heard that tape. And we just kind of reached out to, a few people. I think Max locked it down that it was at the College of Hawaii Library. Is that where we ended up?
Yeah, University of Hawaii Library ended up being the custodians of the tapes.
Yeah, and they transferred them for us for, I think it was like $14 or something like that. And that was the first time we heard Don's voice, and we thought, man, he's so charismatic and he's such a good storyteller. It would be great to see him on camera when he's doing this interview. And that was kind of the genesis of doing this stop motion animated puppet, doing a sit down interview with us, just like all the other subjects of the film.
And so for listeners who are trying to picture this, to me, it really strikes me as the, what is it? The Rudolph Shiny New Year, or all of those. Was it Rankin Bass or?
Yeah, Rankin Bass.
That was our main inspiration for the design of the character, was those Rankin Bass Christmas specials. So you think about Frosty the Snowman and Rudolph, and that was in the 60s, I think. Those came out, and that for one thing, it's something that look is something that a lot of people are familiar with, but it also really strongly suggests that mid-century era, which was sort of peak tiki, right? You think like 50s and 60s, when it was such a huge part of American pop culture. And so we thought that would be appropriate for this film.
Well, and it also gave you the opportunity to include the cigar, which just seems like it was such a part of it was almost part of his, his wardrobe was the cigar he always had. And all these pictures you see him with a cigar. And it was really nice to be able to see the puppet kind of gesturing around with the cigar and having it be part of the mannerisms of his speech. So I personally thought that was a really fun way to do it. What about the actual cartoon animations? Because there were a couple of different versions of that too. And I found myself really enjoying it.
Yeah. Early on, we knew that, Donn tells these fantastic stories, and we weren't going to be able to show photos of them or anything like that. So we knew that animation was important, and we wanted to make sure we allotted a lot of our budget towards animation. We didn't really know what style to go with in terms of, like maybe we would do a mid-century thing. But the more we talked about it, we thought it would be cool to have the style kind of fit the time period of Donn's life. So in the 1930s, it's animated like a 1930s cartoon, like Rubber Hose style, black and white. And then in the mid-century, it's kind of a Hanna-Barbera thing. I think in the 40s during World War II, it's sort of Looney Tunes-esque. And that was something we really wanted to do. And we not knowing very much about animation, definitely not as much as we know now, we didn't realize that every time you change the style, you're basically doubling the budget. So like having 4 styles of animation, we were quadrupling the budget because you have to do the character designs, you have to do the background, you have to redo all the work that you've already done. So we kind of got laughed out of 4 or 5 meetings with animation studios. And and then Max, you got a tip that there was a studio in Bogota, Colombia we should reach out to.
Yeah, from a friend who's also a doc filmmaker, Chris Ninnis. He just did a film called Not Just a Goof about the making of the Goofy movie on Disney. Anyway, they were already working with this team, Venturia Animation, and he said, try these guys, just give them a call and see what happens. And so we sent Juan Urbina, the creative director, kind of the basic rundown of what we were looking to do with the film, except for we didn't talk about changing styles, like having a different style for each decade, because we had given up on that idea. And the first call we had with him, he gets on the phone and he says, hey guys, I want to pitch you something just based on what you've sent me. What if the style of animation changed for every decade of the story? And we said, this is a great idea, Juan. Let's go with it. So luckily the team there, they're huge animation history buffs, and they were happy to take it on as a challenge. And I think it serves two purposes in the film. And one, it's visually interesting, but it also kind of grounds the viewer a little bit. Like you see that black and white rubber hose style animation, you have a sense of when that is without us having to tell you exactly when that's happening in the story.
Yeah. I thought it was really, really well done across the board, and it kept it moving. It's difficult sometimes to dig into, I think anyway, some of the more like corporate details of someone's lives, like some of the more picayune aspects of creating businesses and the relationships between certain people. It can get a little bit bogged down, and I think having the infusion of the ability to cut away from something to an animation that was a lot more dynamic really made the film sort of fly by, but in a good way, right? And I kind of, to me, it seems very rewatchable in that respect. Like I would delight in having, for example, like if I was on a short plane trip or something and this was on, I'd be like, boom, I know what I'm watching.
Nice. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
So, Donn, as you mentioned, you said if half of the things about this person's life are true, like this is just unheard of. We need to dive deeper. What are some of either the key questions that once you decided you were doing this documentary on Donn Beach, what are some of the key questions that sort of presented themselves to you that you wanted to answer? Or maybe some of the tensions that started to arise the more you learned about him? Because I started seeing, as we went through the film, quite a few different, almost like different urges or different impulses in this one person.
Yeah, I mean, Donn, he was one of these guys who just has, all of his ideas are big ideas, right? It's like he sets out to do something and he's going to go 100% and it's going to be grandiose, over the top, no matter what it is. And so you kind of, as we learned a little bit about his life and his career, it's like he had so many of these projects that were kind of like, if somebody did one of these things during their lifetime, that would be a great accomplishment, right? But he opens the Donn the Beachcomber in Hollywood in 1933 officially. And that becomes kind of the blueprint for the tiki bar as we know it. Right, he creates over 60 cocktails, many of which are still standards today. Right, he gets into the hospitality business. He opens multiple bars and restaurants in Hawaii. He has a hotel in Tahiti. He has a casino on the water in Hong Kong. That's like modeled after a Mississippi steamship, riverboat. And we start going down the list and it's like, okay, first of all, how did he manage to do this, right? Like, what was the path that took him to do all of these different things? And the thing that became just as interesting with that, as that was, how did he lose these things, right? Because you look at the success of Donn the Beachcomber, which blows up in the 30s, and within a few years of them opening, Donn the Beachcomber is a household name. And somehow by 1940, Donn Beach is out of the business entirely. And the more we started to learn about that and the possibility of the mob being involved and all these other things, we don't want to give away too much here, but there were some big questions that we felt like we had to tackle in this film.
It kind of surprised me that and again, don't need to spoil too much of the film, but it kind of surprised me that he was like drafted into the war. Right. Like it kind of strikes me as almost like it certainly wasn't, right. He's not a Joe DiMaggio, right, in terms of his status, but the way that it got executed, and people will have to watch the film to learn about what he did in the war and how that ended up kind of informing some of the stuff that came next, was also super fascinating. Because if you had said, hey, we're going to watch a documentary on a famous LA restaurateur, I would not have thought that being drafted into World War II was going to be like a main focus on this. So there's so many different twists and turns, and almost as fascinating as like the different places he ended up winding up were, to be honest, the part that I liked the most that I didn't expect was the women in his life. So can you provide any just little glimpses into sort of his romantic relationships and how those ended up moving the plot of Donn the Beachcomber from where he started at a one venue in LA all the way to, sort of losing it all?
Yeah. His first two wives, especially, it just seems like it was a matter of convenience almost, or necessity, that he get married. His first wife, Sunny, she came in and really sort of helped him make Donn the Beachcomber a success. He was a huge idea guy, but he couldn't always execute the business side of things. And Sunny, being a woman in the 1930s, she had a huge business acumen, I guess, but she was a woman in the 1930s. She couldn't really run a business. So it was sort of a perfect partnership for the two of them, because she could run his business and he could just be creative. And then, his wife, Carla, he meets later in life. He's in Hawaii, and it almost feels like she's more plays into the character that he's playing. He needs to have this wife who's somewhat exotic. She was from South America, and it seems like it was a loveless marriage. It seems like it was a marriage, she got to be Donn the Beachcomber's wife, and he got to have this beautiful young woman as his wife, but they didn't really seem to be romantically involved at all. It was more for show, it seems like. And then Phoebe, he meets very late in his life, and it seems like that was really his one true love, when he could finally just be happy. And when we sort of learned about these women, we kind of realized like Donn's life could easily be categorized in these 3 chapters of kind of him sort of discovering himself and discovering who he was as a public figure, and then sort of just letting it all go and learning to be happy in the end, is kind of how I see it. I don't know. What do you think?
There's kind of this great irony in Donn Beach's life, where he creates this character of Donn the Beachcomber, right? And in some ways he's beholden to that for decades. That was his public persona. And so when he was out anywhere, public facing, he was Donn the Beachcomber. But he was pretty well off for most of his life, and he was kind of a jet setter and running these businesses all around the country. He wasn't like walking around the beach and hanging out in a shack most of the time. And as he kind of evolves as a person, and eventually lets go of a lot of these things and settles down with this person that he truly loves toward the end of his life, he's already decades past being Donn the Beachcomber in any kind of meaningful way. And that's when he becomes an actual like beachcomber figure. You know, for years, Donn and Phoebe are living in this houseboat in a lagoon in Tahiti, and and toward the end of Donn's life, he had so many successes over the years, but toward the end of his life, he didn't really have much. He wasn't wealthy at that point, and so it's like he was Donn the Beachcomber toward the end, even though it took him 70 years to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the sort of the character that he played, because it really does come out when he's starting this restaurant in LA and running up to the roof to do freak evening thunderstorms so that people don't leave the bar, where they see this rain coming down, where it's just him standing at the top with a hose. And so sort of like there's the misdirection element of him. Another aspect of that, of course, this is very famous and well known, of him sort of numbering his ingredients and keeping this like almost double blind aspect to what he makes, such that it can't really be replicated. So there's this sense of character, there's this sense of almost like misdirection and almost like a trickster element to him, but like the life of the party trickster, like a sort of like a benevolent trickster to him. And then you're right, I see that sort of changing or modifying in certain ways. Like Carla almost seems like she took that energy and like took it in like a bit of a malevolent direction, where she was like the life of the party, but maybe not the nicest person to be around, and that kind of had some effects on him. So what do you think of this concept of misdirection, or this trickster aspect of Donn, as contrasted with the aspect of him that wants really good quality and wants to create an excellent product and really take care of people?
Yeah, I will say Donn, to, internally, we've kind of compared him to like a Willy Wonka or Walt Disney or something. He has this magical element, right? Like where you come to Donn the Beachcomber and you're going to get a show, right? You're going to have an experience. And he was very, very tuned into that as a host, right? And there were certain things that he insisted on doing himself. Like at the original restaurant, he would come out and pour the flaming coffee grog and make this big presentation of it. And when people would come in, and sometimes you get a lei, you get a kiss on the cheek from Donn. It was a big thing to have this like this host personality. And then like the flip side of that, like you're saying, he was, I don't know, the trickster element, right? Like it's like he's a showman, so he's presenting and being a host. And I think he's very, he cares deeply about having that experience be special for guests. But there's also this thing where he's kind of like, he's not a snake oil salesman, but there's this behind the scenes thing where he's like, how am I going to make a buck on this? And you kind of see that throughout his career, right? Like with the casino ship, he's like creating this special experience on the water, but it's to get people to spend money, right? And the same thing in the restaurant in Hollywood. It's like he goes on the roof and creates this rainstorm so people stay for a little while longer and have an extra drink. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this weird dichotomy where he is genuinely this incredible host and so gracious and creating these special experiences for people. But there's always a little something in it for Donn too.
Alex, what do you think of that sort of quality and misdirection disparity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a line in the film where Phoebe is talking about how, he was obsessed with quality and authenticity, and it was in order to make money, yes, but it was done with a certain amount of respect and like gravitas. It was done because you could do something to make a quick buck, but if you're going to do it really well, you're going to make a lot more because people are going to keep coming back because they're going to know this is different and this is, quality over quantity. And I think that he knew that early on. He realized that, especially I think when he went to Hawaii and he saw what was going on in Hawaii and how authenticity is what people wanted to see when they came to Hawaii, but they weren't really seeing it anymore. especially when Hawaii was becoming a state. It was really just becoming another part of America. And he knew that, you're going to have a lot more people traveling here if you show them Hawaiian culture and you show them what it is that they're coming here to see, so that they're not disappointed when they get off the plane. So I think he was really smart in knowing what people were going to want, and knowing, the more authentic it is and the more real it is, people are going to appreciate it more. And they're going to open their wallets more too. I mean,
How many times did the description of like a bar for people of means, or a bar for discerning individuals come up throughout it? So yeah, no, he was definitely catering to not only people who wanted the experience but could pay for it. Alex, what you just said, you were alluding to his move to Hawaii, and it was sort of a necessitated move. I won't spoil why that was necessary. But he moves to Hawaii, and you see him. There was some great footage of him actually doing these luau's, and it really got me thinking about authenticity, because you've got a white guy going and reviving Polynesian culture in Hawaii. So how do you think? Like you mentioned authenticity, and I think that's, to this day, is probably one of the biggest hot button topics in the world of tropical drinks. What was Donn's take on authenticity, and just what does that make you think of?
Yeah, I mean, Donn, throughout his career, it was very important for him to have a level of authenticity. So, as an example, in Hawaii in the let's see, this would have been late 40s into the 50s. He started doing these luau's, right? These big dance performances. At some point, he expanded that show to go beyond just Hawaiian dance and music. He included a Tahitian element of that. People going to watch these shows were from the mainland. They wouldn't have known the difference had he just brought out people, Hawaiian people, and said, make something up, do something else. So we'll call this the Tahitian performance. But he actually went to Tahiti and brought in people who knew Tahitian dance and music to do that. He didn't have to do that. It was something that he really wanted to do and truly was important to him. For another example, we don't even mention this in the film, but in the late 1930s in Hollywood, Donn is having fresh flowers flown in from Hawaii on Pan Am clipper ships. And when Donn the Beachcomber is doing very well, they're spending the equivalent of about $8,000 a month flying in fresh flowers from Hawaii. Yeah. Why do that if you don't care about the experience, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other side of it is, like, in Donn's bars and restaurants in Hawaii, he's employing Hawaiian people who are, doing actual Hawaiian dance, performing actual Hawaiian music. So it's complicated, right? I mean, you look at Hawaii, and the Hawaiian people in a large part had their culture stripped from them, a lot like indigenous people on the mainland. And, Donn is not, we're not painting Donn as the savior of Hawaiian culture, but it's complicated because without the tourism industry in Hawaii, there's a whole generation or multiple generations of Hawaiian people who might not have, that might have been lost in a large way. So yeah, it's a weird, complicated situation, and, Donn is certainly part of it. So it's a bigger topic than we could cover in the whole film, but we do think it's a great conversation to have. And if people watching this movie get, some information that they can help to explore that topic with, then we feel like that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that also begs the question of, like, what is Donn's legacy, like, beyond the fact that, it's an iconic mid-century brand that everyone has heard of? What are some of the important aspects of his legacy beyond kind of drawing what we might say is a better kind of attention to Hawaiian tourism at the time when it badly needed it? What are some of the larger implications of Donn that can still be felt and seen today, particularly if you go to some of the tropical bars where you guys filmed a lot of these interviews?
Yeah, I think a big part of it, especially at these tropical bars, is just the sort of escapist aspect of it, or the storytelling aspect of it. I think coming at it as filmmakers, Max and I are storytellers, and seeing Donn's ability to tell a story within a space and within flavors and food and drink is just kind of remarkable. And I think whether it's a tiki bar or any bar, that there is a story with the restaurants and bars that you go into, that you appreciate story being told, and I think that's kind of in the tradition of Donn. I think he's one of the people who started doing that and made it very successful.
Yeah, and then the Donn's legacy in the cocktails is kind of undeniable, right? Like you can go back to a few things in the pre-prohibition era where you have sort of the basic template for this style of drink, but Donn really did take that to the next level. And like we said earlier, it's his contributions to the cocktail world are still felt today. I mean, you can go into just about any kind of tiki bar and have a lot of Donn Beach classics. So, and I think somebody in the film mentions it. They talk about the craft cocktail, the concept of the craft cocktail, right? Which was sort of popularized here in the, I don't know, like 80s or 90s, right? Dave, you go to Dave Wondrich or you kind of start talking about the craft cocktail with the revival of these drinks that use fresh ingredients and juices and homemade syrups and all this stuff. And it's like Donn was doing this 90 years ago. So yeah, I mean, he really was a pioneer in that sense. Yeah, and then, I mean, the other thing, I don't know, as far as his legacy, you can kind of talk about like this whole tiki world as a bigger thing, which has expanded because it's beyond the cocktails. It's fashion, it's music, and it all sort of spawned from this thing that Donn did in 1933, or possibly slightly earlier.
Yeah, it's 19 or mid-century escapism. It's yeah, you're right, it is undeniable. One, I guess we might call it a character whom I sort of expected to pop up in the film but didn't see would be Trader Vic, sort of the other famous tiki person, Victor Bergeron. From what I know, it seemed like there might not have been the friendliest relationship, or at least sort of a competitive relationship between the two. Is there a reason why you chose to maybe not really focus on that so much?
Yeah, we definitely did focus on it for a very long time. It was in the film. We had a whole Trader Vic section in the film for many, many cuts. The problem is Trader Vic was such a big personality and had such a big story himself. It never felt right. What we were doing was we were kind of steering away from Donn's story for 20 minutes or whatever to talk about Trader Vic. And then there's never really a resolution between Donn and Vic. So it felt like we were leaving the main story and coming back, which didn't really feel respectful to Donn or respectful to Vic. Like, Vic's story is more than a 20-minute segment in a Donn Beach Comer documentary. Their relationship was kind of, I think in that section, Martin Kate says they were frenemies before the word was created, because they were kind of friendly competitors, and they would go to each other's bars. There's a great story about Donn going to Trader Vic's, and they sit down and they drink all night, and they, kind of jab at each other, but it's all like in sort of good fun. We learned that Sunny was more of a she disliked Vic more than Donn did, probably because she was more of a business person and saw him as more of a threat, where I think Donn just saw another cocktail host that he could hang out with.
Yeah, well, I think they were so similar in many ways, right? They both had these big personalities, And so, yeah, I mean, they were, from our research, they actually liked each other quite a bit. But they were competitors, and that was part of it as well. And we do have some Trader Vic stuff that'll be on the DVD Blu-ray release, because it's a really great section that we wanted to include in the film. We just didn't have time for it. It didn't make sense.
Yeah, it's a great point about sort of distracting from Donn. And I'm sorry that question sort of occurred to me. It wasn't on the list that I sent you guys. I didn't intend it as a gotcha.
No, it's funny. Somebody asked that question at almost every screening we've had. They're like, "Where's Trader Vic in this movie?"
But I think that's why, I didn't even realize that until we were having this conversation, which I think makes the point for you, right? It's like, I was totally delighted with just learning about sort of the intimate aspects of Donn's life that I had no clue about. I had no clue about his 3 love interests. I had no clue about his time in, Hawaii and with this crazy gambling boat and all that stuff. I had, it really did open up the storytelling to stay focused and meander in a structured way over time. So yeah, I mean, is there anything, before we jump into the lightning round here, is there anything egregious that I've overlooked or that you really want to make sure that my listeners know about either Donn Beach or the film?
Gosh, no. I mean, about the film, the film is, we're still taking the film around and screening it across the country. We did about 30 screenings last year all over the country, and we're going to do that. We're going to continue on for the first few months, at least, of this year. And then we're also working on a Blu-ray DVD release, as well as a digital release. So we know that there are a number of people who have been following the project for a couple of years now. And so it will be more widely available, hopefully, in the next
few months,
sometime in the next few months, or middle of the year, something like that. We are actively working on it. Excellent.
So hopefully at one or more of our favorite streaming services, we'll be able to pull up a seat and check this out. Also saw quite a few film festivals on your website.
Yeah, we played in about a dozen film festivals. That was pretty much all of 2024.
Well, let's jump into the lightning round here. Obviously, Donn Beach, one of his best known cocktails is, of course, the zombie. We've got that lovely marketing shtick of you can only drink 2 at a sitting. If you're being honest, how many zombies can you take down, classic Donn style zombies, and still maintain some semblance of a conversation with a close friend? This doesn't have to be like an intense business conversation, just a chat with a close friend. How many zombies could you take down and stay upright?
We're talking about like a 1934 4 ounces of rum zombie.
Yep.
At this point in my life and my drinking career, I would say I'm really only comfortable maybe drinking 1.5. I've done 2 or 3 in a sitting, but just filming this movie has really done a toll on my liver and my body, I think. So
yeah, I think I'm good for 1 generally, unless it's a really close friend, then maybe 2.
Yeah. Okay.
We can have a good time.
Good. So when you get to know someone as well as you do through researching them for years, like you've done with this documentary, I'm sure that you ended up asking yourself at certain points, what would Donn think of this? What would Donn think of that? So I've got a few more recent cocktail trends, and I just want, would Donn give this a thumbs up, thumbs down? If you have a reason, love to hear that. So the first topic is super juice. Would Donn be pro super or anti super juice? Max says anti.
I don't know. I'm going to say anti. I don't know. I think John's he's just so old school. I think I'm going to say anti.
Alex?
Yeah, I think so too. I think he, if it's not something that he would be able to find in the 1930s, I don't think he would be down with it.
Even though he was making all those mixes and using blenders and stuff at a time when you still think he'd be no, huh?
Well, yeah, maybe. I guess he did make a lot of stuff like that to make his life easier too. So Maybe yes. Maybe yes. I don't know.
I feel like he would have to come up with a fake origin story for it, and some sort of excuse that made it sexy as opposed to chemical.
Yeah.
All right.
And he'd be able to do that.
Yeah. All right. Botanical rum.
Ooh, botanical rum. I think if Donn had a distributor who was like, hey, I can get you some of this if you order some cases of this, he would find a very interesting way to use it and, again, come up with a good story for why it's the only rum that would work in this drink.
Yeah, I'm going to say thumbs up. I think
Nice.
Donn liked almost all rum to some degree.
All right. Last one in the What Would Donn Think segment. Tropical futurism / space tiki.
Oh man, this is controversial. I think you're trying to get us in trouble. I think that Donn was a storyteller, and I think that he wouldn't consider it the same exact thing that he was doing, but I don't think he would be against it. I think he would appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, I think thumbs up. Also, I'm going to go controversial here too. I mean, it's so different from what Donn originally did, but it's also the same, right? It's like it's not trying to be a Donn the Beachcomber style bar. It's very much its own thing, but absolutely in the spirit of escapism and storytelling.
Yeah, I think, the first time I encountered, like the whole space tiki concept, or, it has certain other cousins like heavy metal tiki and, stuff like that. But the space tiki in particular for me, I saw it and I was like, ooh, I don't know. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, no, this is it. Because what is tiki in the future? What are the sailing ships of the future? They're spaceships, right? Like, what is exploring all these far off places? Like, that's pretty perfect. And it also, like takes away some of the ick factors for in really creative ways. So,
Totally
nice. All right, your most underrated Donn the Beachcomber cocktail. I'm sure that many Donn the Beachcomber cocktails were made for you. What was the most underrated one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of something that's underrated. We experimented with a what is it? The Beachcomber's Gold. Is that what we had?
The Gold Cup.
We did this. Yeah, we did this sort of like beer that was based on those kind of flavor profiles, and it's not a cocktail that you find very often. A lot of people maybe are not crazy about it, but I actually kind of liked it. So yeah,
it's kind of citrusy and star anise y.
Yeah, you get a little bit of those licorice flavors. You get, I mean, yeah, it's funny because you look at these cocktails and you go through the list of 60 cocktails and you start to see like, okay, most of these are very, very similar. And then you have some that are like kind of slightly different profiles, like a Missionary's Downfall with the mint mixed in there and the is it a peach liqueur that's part of that?
Yeah, peach.
So there's a few things with these like slightly modified things that stick out, but eventually you look at the list and you're like, oh, 80% of these are pretty similar.
Yeah. We've partnered with a lot of bars on our road show, and they always do like a Donn Beachcomber menu for a special of 4 of Donn's cocktails you can get. And we've had a lot of I think like the Shark's Tooth and the Cobra Fang are cocktails that a lot of people put on those menus, but you don't always see them on regular tiki menus. Every once in a while you'll see one of them, but I think we've had a lot of Cobra Fangs in the last year, and it's a pretty good drink. I don't know why it's not on more just standard tiki bar menus. Maybe it's too similar to some other ones, but I enjoy it.
Yeah,
Nice.
Actually, the Shark's Tooth is a good one too. It has that like it's got that cherry, a little bit of that cherry syrup, which is like a slightly different spin on that profile.
Yeah, I think I was recently reading a Reddit thread where they were doing, the big trend right now is going through all these different categories and saying, best cocktail, weirdest, best tiki cocktail, weirdest tiki cocktail, most complicated. And so I think the Missionary's Downfall was voted like the most over the top, because you have to blend like all this mint in there with it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. It was an interesting call out to me, but I personally, I've only had it once, but the mint and peach combo is like not something that you expect when you go to a tiki bar. So I was like, okay, like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, it's a great drink. It's they make a really good one at Strongwater in Anaheim, California, where they don't have blenders like that type of blender. So they do it with cubes or with a little pebble ice, and it's really, really good. But I think that's the reason you don't see it at a lot of bars, because it needs to be blended, not like flash blender, but blended like a margarita.
Yeah. And for listeners, just to drop another breadcrumb to entice you to check this film out, there's a whole section of the documentary that deals with sort of the back of house that Donn developed with all this technology, and with the Filipino bartenders who ended up being so important to the legacy of his venues certainly on the West Coast. So lots of great stuff in the documentary. I want to thank you gentlemen so much for taking the time here with me. How can folks connect with you and follow for updates about when this hits streaming and when you'll be doing your road show?
Yeah, the donnoftiki.com. There's 2 N's in Donn, DONN. You can find everything there. We've got our roadshow schedule, which is constantly updated. Every couple of weeks, it's changed. And follow us on Instagram at the Donn of Tiki. Those are kind of the 2 main places where we send out information as often as possible.
Yeah, we also have some merch on the store. We got some glassware and T-shirts and other things. They mostly feature art from the film, so you get a little taste of what's in the film, the animation.
And we all know how much the Tropical Drinks fans love a good custom mug, custom drinkware situation. So definitely check that out. It's great animation. And thank you both, Max and Alex, for being my guests here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast.
Of course. Thank you, Eric.
Pleasure.
It was
Thanks,
fun.
Eric.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's a couple things you can do to help the show. One would be to rate and review this program anywhere you enjoy listening to podcasts, especially on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it will be for other like-minded flavor nerds to enjoy the content that I produce. You can also follow the Modern Bar Cart YouTube channel, where I post video clips from the podcast and beyond. And you can join our growing Discord community, which is where our listeners submit questions for upcoming guests and chat about all kinds of fun spirits and cocktail shenanigans. It's also where I share fun perks and discounts that are too exclusive to blast out on the airwaves. To join our community Discord server or get in touch with me for any other reason, all you need to do is drop me a line by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and boozy adventures are just beginning. So remember, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, one heck of a documentary by Alex Lamb and Maxwell, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Direct Fire Studios production, copyright 2026.